when we look in the past, and we have to understand that when we're dealing in the Old Covenant or the Hebrew writings, especially dealing with the prophets Daniel, there's a lot of very good faith inspiring example in there on how righteous men operated. So when you look at the book of Daniel, a wealth of inspiration in there to show how we're to walk, especially in very terrible times where your faith could be challenged by not God, it's being challenged by evil that wants you to join. And so the timing we're talking about is when King Nebuchadnezzar existed. And during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, there was an interesting challenge that came about where he had basically constructed a idol, a pagan idol, of course, and said that everybody was to bow down and do worship to that. And 3 Hebrews came into that situation of challenge of their faith, life or death. And I ask everybody to read the book of Daniel for the purpose of educating yourself on what was going on there so that you can build a faith as these righteous men did. And what did they say confronted with a life or death situation? So I came across, when I was researching things on names and kind of down the direction of, are we really in anything different than there was at the time of early men of faith? Could there possibly have been a name that was added on to your real name back then? Well, when we look at the time of Nebuchadnezzar and the time of Daniel and the 3 Hebrews that were with him at the time, we notice that there's an interesting scenario that comes up, that they actually had names that were not Hebrew names that were placed on them by, we'll just call it the legal state at that time, or the worldly secular, or the kingdoms that were opposed to the position of God. And therefore, how did God's people before Christ arrived deal with that scenario or deal with that situation? So all we can look at is the facts. And so when we look at that, we're going to go into, why did Nebuchadnezzar change Daniel's name to Belteshazzar? And this came up when I was doing some research, and I was going to do a video on this probably at least 6 months ago, but unfortunately it kind of got in the pile of all the great things we could talk about. And this now comes very much in pertinence and importance to talk about. So why did Nebuchadnezzar change Daniel's name to Belteshazzar? Well, on a site, they clearly gave a good answer through research, doing their research of the Bible. And it stated, Nebuchadnezzar was king of Babylonia from 605 BC to around 563 BC, and he was responsible for changing Daniel's name to Belteshazzar. King Nebuchadnezzar had conquered Judah, destroying Jerusalem in 586 BC, an event that had been prophesied by the prophet Jeremiah in Jeremiah 25, verse 9. Some of the inhabitants of Judah were taken back to Babylon as captives, including a number of the children of the royal and noble families, to be integrated into Babylonian society. Among those taken were 4 boys around age of 14 at the time, named Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. All 4 of these Hebrew names had meanings connected to faith in God. But upon arrival in Babylon, their names were changed. I hope you're seeing the significance on the statement of birth record, that a very important change really happens on it, because that's really a name change, because we're dealing with legal, that's a permanent legal name being placed on there in the registration, which has nothing to do with your spiritual God-given name. Okay, and then we have to look at what was going on at the time of these Babylonian leaders placing a system that was changing their names into something that had meaning in the Babylonian pagan worship, and how their Hebrew names got placed in secondary position. So it says, all 4 of these Hebrew names had meanings connected to faith in God, but upon arrival in Babylon, their names were changed. The chief official of Babylon gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. And that's Daniel 1, verse 7. The boys' names were changed as a way of encouraging them to forget the God and traditions of their homeland and become conformed. Remember, do not be conformed to this world. Conform to the ways and gods of Babylon. It was a forced assimilation. Nebuchadnezzar wanted Daniel and his friends to conform to the pattern of this world. Look at Romans 12, verse 2. And a name change was one step toward that goal. Each name Daniel and his friends were given carried a meaning associated with a different Babylonian deity. Abednego means servant of Nebo. For example, Belteshazzar, the name given to Daniel, means Bel protects his life. The meaning of the name Daniel is, in Hebrew, God is my judge. The suffix of Daniel's name and Mishael's is El, which refers to Elohim, one of the names of the God of Israel. Azariah and Hananiah carry the suffix Aya, or Yah, which in short is for Yahweh, the covenant name of God. So, and you can see Isaiah 26, verse 4. So it's very pertinent that we can see the parallel, because there's many parallels that show up in the Bible that are there to govern us, just as Jesus came as the last Adam, because he passed the test that Adam failed. So when we are born again, in that sense, into Christ, it's as if he put himself instead in place to wipe out the existence of what Adam did and brought us into the position as if there was no sin had ever happened. So it's like back to the beginning, back to the Genesis before original sin occurred. And therefore, that's really the true meaning of that. And that's the parallel between what Jesus is as the last Adam and Adam being the first Adam. So we have a lot to learn from this, but we really are, in essence, assigned a Babylonian name, so to speak, but the test is our joinder to it. Even though they may have been named that by that side, certainly they were not going to revolt and they said, well, that's Caesar's or that's Nebuchadnezzar's. But they truly knew who they were as Hebrews under God, under the nation of Israel, under that covenant nation, and therefore knew how to separate that. So you'll find that there are definite reasonings when you're reading the scripture, how it's laid out, why at times they show up with the Babylonian name in certain sequences, and then when their faith is really in power, they show up with their true Hebrew names under the power of God. So we need to know that you got to do the reading, you got to do the research, and certainly my, I give 2 thumbs up to this site that brought up the question, why did Nebuchadnezzar change Daniel's name to Belteshazzar? Good research.